Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Snow had begun falling in the afternoon, but by the time night swallowed the road leading to the northern Villa district, it was no longer snow. It was like millions of tiny white blades slicing diagonally across the windshield, lashing the asphalt, blurring the entire world. Sky and ground merged into a dull gray mass, leaving only two long, stretched streaks of yellow light from the SUV's headlights, forcing their way forward over the slick ice. Sebastian Hale held the steering wheel steady, his gaze fixed ahead. The trees lining the road, once tall and proud, were now nothing but dark shapes bent beneath the weight of snow. Branches sagged and bowed, clumps of snow thudding heavily onto the roof whenever the wind struck hard. Inside the cabin, the heater ran at full power, the temperature perfectly controlled, the leather seat molding to his back. Everything here had been bought with money, except the silence which he had never paid for, yet possessed in excess. He was used to nights like this, a crowded city behind him, meetings dragging late into the night, a half-finished dinner at a luxury restaurant abandoned because of a call from legal counsel, a car, a snow-covered road, and a villa at the end of it with lights always on. But no one waiting. No text asking, "Are you home yet?" No small footsteps running to the entry rug. No smell of hot soup drifting from the kitchen. Just a flawless, immaculate space, perfect to the point of coldness. Sebastian didn't dwell on it. He had never allowed himself the habit of looking back or indulging regret. In his world, decisions were made, contracts were signed, numbers multiplied, and emotions, if they existed at all, were kept outside the conference room's glass doors. Until the headlights swept past an old bus stop. It sat not far from the roadside, a rusted iron structure the city had long forgotten. Half the information sign was broken off, the glass shelter shattered, leaving only the bare metal frame exposed to the snow. No bus routes run through this area anymore. At night, especially a night like this, it should have been completely empty, but it wasn't. For an instant, as the light passed over it, he saw a dark shape, something that didn't belong to the snow or the metal. Sebastian frowned instinctively, lifted his foot off the accelerator, then pressed the brake. The tires shrieked against the ice, the SUV slowed, slid slightly, and came to a full stop a few meters from the bus stop. The wind slammed into the car's body at once, making it shudder as if pushed from behind. Inside the cabin, the wind battering the windows sounded like a hailstorm. He sat still for a moment, drawing in a deep breath, feeling as though something heavy had just pressed down on his chest. A sensation that didn't belong to business or billion-dollar deals, but to somewhere very far away, very old and very cold. He turned off the high beams, leaving only the low lights on, then pushed open the door and stepped out. The cold air struck him immediately, like a slap. The warmth inside the car was torn away as the wind rushed in behind him. Even his thick coat wasn't enough to stop the chill from cutting straight through to the bone. Snow lashed his face, his neck, every tiny exposed gap. His expensive leather shoes sank at once into the soft, wet, treacherous snow. He pulled his collar higher and moved toward the bus stop. The closer he got, the clearer the shape on the snow became. It wasn't amorphous, it was a person. A young woman crouched there, her narrow back pressed tightly against the freezing metal pole, as if trying to borrow some stability from the lifeless iron. Her coat was far too thin for temperatures near freezing. The fabric at the sleeves was worn, soaked dark with melting snow. Her long hair hung loose and plastered to her face, strands clinging to her cheeks, tiny ice crystals forming like shards of glass dust. In her arms, a baby boy, around 10 months old, was curled in a thin blanket. He slept restlessly, his head tilted slightly back, small hands protruding, red from the cold. A faint purplish tint touched his tiny lips, his chest rising and falling too fast, as if the small body were fighting winter entirely on its own. Sebastian stopped just a few steps away. He wasn't a doctor, had no medical training, but he knew what hypothermia looked like. The baby was too cold. The woman was nearly motionless, not because she had given up, but because he could see the tension still in her shoulders, her arms still locked around the child, her whole body a powerless shield against the storm. She didn't look up when she heard his footsteps. She didn't speak. No wave, no plea, no, is someone there? She simply hunched her shoulders lower, curling inward, as if his presence were just another arrow flying toward her, and all she could do was shield the baby a little more. Old images exploded in his mind. Another parking lot, another blizzard, another woman, younger than the one before him, but just as thin, with the same hollow eyes of exhaustion and fear. She clutched a child to her chest, crouched against a concrete wall, trying to block the wind with her body. That child had been him. His lips had turned purple, his hands numb, his head resting against his mother's chest, listening to her heart pounding wildly amid the roar of the wind. Sebastian clenched his jaw. He had thought he'd buried that memory deep enough to never dig it up again. But seeing this posture, the way her arms wrapped around the baby, shattered everything. He took another step forward, his voice low, steady, cutting through the wind without needing to shout. "You can't stay here." The woman startled, not the jolt of someone half asleep, but the flinch of someone long accustomed to threatening sounds. She pulled the baby closer, her chest jerking with a breath, but she still didn't look up. Her voice was hoarse, weak, nearly slipping away. "It's okay. I'm leaving soon." "Leaving for where?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the child. She was silent, her slight shoulders tensed as if every extra word were another knife. The wind howled. A slab of snow slid off the roof of the bus stop and burst apart in white powder. The baby whimpered softly in his sleep, a small, helpless protest. Sebastian didn't ask again. He knew the answer well enough. Nowhere. Just sitting there until there wasn't enough warmth left in her body to keep shaking. He bent slightly, bringing his face into her line of sight. The yellow light from the car cut across her features, sketching them faintly. Slender nose, slightly high cheekbones, cracked lips. Under other circumstances, she might have been beautiful. Tonight, that beauty was buried beneath layers of exhaustion, hunger, fear, and something heavier still, despair. "On this road," he said, his voice low and clear, "there are no houses, no clinic, no buses, no one. If you stay here, by morning the road crew will be the first to find you both." She blinked faintly, as if picturing it. Her hand instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around the baby. Useless, but she did it anyway. The gesture tightened Sebastian's chest. "You don't need to worry," she whispered. "Just a little longer." A little longer. He knew that kind of little longer. His mother had said it too, teeth chattering. Just a little longer. Someone will come. Someone had come, but not because of her prayers, because a car had stopped. Sebastian straightened, no longer arguing. He turned and walked back toward his vehicle. A few steps away, he opened the rear door, letting light and warmth spill out, then paused. He didn't need to think about what to do. The decision had been made the moment he saw the baby's small, reddened hands. He turned back, unshielded from the wind, letting the cold cut across his face. This time, he didn't reach out his hand. He knew if he did, she would recoil like a cornered animal. He simply said, his voice low, firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "Come with me." 3 simple words, spoken more easily than any clause in the contracts he signed every day, yet far heavier. They fell into the night like a rope thrown out over a frozen sea. The woman lifted her head. For the first time, Sebastian saw into her eyes. There was no surprise there. Perhaps she no longer believed in complete miracles. There was doubt, fear, shame, and something else. The instinctive vigilance of someone who had had to protect herself for far too long. But deeper than that was a thin, fragile glimmer, like the flicker of a candle wavering in the wind. "I can't go back," she said with difficulty, her lips trembling from cold and from fear she couldn't name. "I don't want to go back." "No one's talking about going back," he replied, each syllable firm. "Just leaving here. Right now." She studied him for a few seconds more, as if weighing whether he was lying. But in her physical state, she no longer had the strength to verify anything. The cold was seeping into every fiber, slowing her thoughts. The only thing still clear was the weight of the baby in her arms. A small weight, yet the sole reason she kept breathing. Not for herself, for him. She bit her lip until it bled. Then she nodded, very slightly, as if any stronger motion might make her collapse. Sebastian didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she had come from or how long she'd been there. He stepped forward, gentle but decisive, sliding his arms beneath the baby. The child's small body, hot and cold at once, touched his palm, making him shudder. The baby was heavier than he expected, not in actual weight, but in the meaning of carrying a life wholly dependent on him. The baby's tightly shut eyes furrowed as he was moved, a thin, fragile moan escaping. Sebastian pressed the child against his chest, using his own body heat and coat to block the biting cold. "Go," he said, without turning back. The woman staggered to her feet, her legs feeling rooted in the snow. She clung to the metal pole for a moment, then let go and stumbled after him. Each step drove her deeper into a decision she hadn't had time to think through but couldn't refuse. Snow lashed her face, stinging her eyes. She raised a hand to shield them, keeping just enough distance from him, like a stray cat not yet fully trusting the hand extended toward it. At the car, he opened the back door wide. She slid inside, careful not to touch anything, as if afraid of staining something too clean, belonging to a different world. When the door closed, the wind was shut out at once, leaving only the steady hum of the engine and her own ragged breathing. Warm air filled her lungs, drawing a small cough from her throat, dry from the cold. Beside her, the baby lay in his arms, resting against the wide leather seat. Sebastian reached back, pulled a blanket from the trunk, draped it over the child, then turned the heat up another notch. The overhead light cast a soft golden glow, dulling the sharp edges of his face. He slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The solid thud sounded like a lock sealing off the outside world. He glanced quickly into the rearview mirror. The woman hugged herself, eyes wide but unfocused, as if she still couldn't believe she was inside the car. Sebastian didn't turn fully around. He spoke quietly. "You need a safe place for both of you." She blinked. The frozen tears on her lashes began to melt in the warmth. Pressing her lips together, she nodded without speaking. Perhaps after everything, she had no words left for trust or gratitude. Words like thank you or please had been used too often in places where no one listened. He faced forward, shifted gears. The SUV moved on, silently swallowing the white distance between the abandoned bus stop and his land. Snow continued to fall, thicker, more vicious, trying to bury all traces. If anyone passed the bus stop minutes later, they would see only snow, rusted metal, and wind. No sign of the young woman and the 10-month-old baby boy who had sat there, nearly erased by winter. Inside the warm cabin, the baby's breathing steadied a little. His body was still cold, but his small hands no longer trembled with every breath. Sebastian felt the weight against his chest, heavy in a way he couldn't explain. He glanced at the windshield, where clumps of snow struck, slid downward, and vanished. The car turned onto the forest road leading up the hill, where large windows of the winter villa glowed yellow in the night. In the back seat, the woman remained curled inward, clutching the child, as if she might spring up and flee at the mere mention of the word back. The baby pressed his cheek into the blanket, murmuring in his restless sleep, the first steady rhythm of breath from a life pulled back from the edge. Inside the car, winter was still there, but somewhere very small, very fragile, a warmth had been kindled, not by the heater, but by the decision of a man who had believed his heart had frozen long ago. The road leading up the hill narrowed as it climbed, winding between rows of snow-laden pine trees. The SUV turned past the towering black iron gate, which opened without a sound, as though the mansion was accustomed to welcoming people in silence. Warm yellow lights flicked on along the driveway, stretching across the blanket of snow and forming a single, glowing path amid the cold night, swallowing everything else around it. Elena stared out the car window, her eyes wide yet vacant. The scene before her was too quiet, too pristine, like a world that didn't belong to someone who had just fled a snowstorm on trembling legs. She kept her hands pressed firmly on her lap, careful not to touch anything, as if one wrong movement would make it all disappear and send her back to that freezing bus station. The car came to a stop before the front steps. Sebastian got out first and opened the rear door. When the warmth rushed in, Elena didn't stand up right away. She saw the light from the grand foyer through the thick glass, glossy floors gleaming so brightly it almost hurt her eyes. This wasn't the light of a temporary refuge. It was the light of safety, something she no longer believed existed. Sebastian bent down and lifted Noah out first. The child squirmed lightly in his sleep, letting out a faint whimper. But once tucked against Sebastian's chest, the small body relaxed. Elena shot to her feet and followed immediately, her worry so palpable it might as well have been visible. She stayed close behind him, ready to reach out at the slightest sign that Noah was slipping from her sight. The massive front doors opened. Warmth washed over her, not harsh but steady, and Elena froze for a moment, dizzy from the sensation. The space inside was vast without feeling empty. A quiet fire crackled in the hearth, flames casting gentle streaks of light across the stone walls. There were no voices, no bustle, only the scent of dry wood and lingering tea. Sebastian said nothing. He walked quickly but without haste, heading straight toward the inner living room. Elena followed, her shoes leaving tiny wet marks on the polished stone floor, a fragile trace proving she had actually stepped into this place. He laid Noah on a large sofa near the fireplace, retrieved a thick blanket from a nearby cabinet, and tucked it around the child. His hands moved with a confidence she hadn't expected. Precise, efficient, not clumsy at all. Elena stood a few steps away, heart thundering, eyes locked on her son. She was used to fighting for every scrap of safety. No matter how warm this room felt, her instincts still screamed caution. Sebastian turned and caught sight of her posture. Elena's shoulders were rigid, her hands gripping the hem of her thin coat, her stance poised as if ready to bolt at any moment. He offered no comforting words. He knew such things would sound meaningless now. He picked up the phone on the table beside the fireplace, turning his back to her. His voice was low, clipped, decisive, calling his private doctor with short, direct phrases. A child showing signs of hypothermia. Come immediately. No panic, no pleading, just an order. When he hung up, he returned to her and draped his coat over her shoulders. She flinched instinctively and stepped back, but the thick coat was already on her, carrying the scent of wind and snow and the lingering warmth of his body. She parted her lips, perhaps to refuse to apologize or to whisper a broken thank you, but her throat was so parched no sound came out. Sebastian moved again. He returned with more blankets, a small jacket, and a spare bottle of milk retrieved from a specialized refrigerator the house kept stocked for emergencies. Items appeared around Elena and Noah as if this moment had been planned, though in truth this was the first time a child had ever entered this mansion. Elena tracked every movement, her mind straining. She searched for signs, a trap, a misunderstanding, a hidden price. But there were none. No questions, no probing stares, no demands for an explanation. When Sebastian approached her again, he stopped, his gaze brushing over her pale face before shifting away. He didn't linger, didn't try to decipher her thoughts. He spoke only one sentence, calm and steady, as though commenting on the weather. You and the child are safe here. The words fell so softly they could have been overlooked, but to Elena, they landed with the weight of something solid and terrifying. She went still. The sentence came without promises, without conditions, without a deadline. That simplicity was what frightened her most. Safe, a concept she had taught herself to doubt. Sebastian walked away without waiting for her reply, disappearing down the hallway leading deeper into the house. Silence settled in his absence. So complete Elena could hear the faint crackle of the fire and Noah's breathing growing steadier. She approached the sofa and slowly sat down, afraid to disturb the fragile peace surrounding them. She placed her hand on Noah's stomach, feeling warmth return. The child stirred, a tiny smile flickering across his dreaming face. The sight made her eyes sting. She leaned down, her forehead touching the blanket, releasing a trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The mansion remained silent. No questions, no intrusion into her past. Somewhere in this vast house, the man who had taken them from that bus station was giving them, for the first time in a very long time, the space to exist without explanation. Elena didn't know how long they would stay. didn't know if everything would collapse by morning. But right now, beside the soft burning fire, beneath golden lights and the warmth spreading slowly through the floor, she allowed herself to believe, for one more night. Just one night, that somewhere in this world, safety did not require permission. Night in the winter villa wasn't as dark as Elena had expected. Soft yellow light quietly flowed along the hallways, enough to keep darkness from ever fully closing in, enough to make every corner of the house visible, clear, exposed. That was precisely why she couldn't sleep. Safety that was too visible was always more suspicious than the dark. Elena sat on the sofa all night, her back straight, shoulders drawn tight. Noah held close to her chest as if releasing him for even a second would allow something to come and tear him away. She didn't lie down, didn't take off her clothes, didn't allow her body to relax. She had learned long ago how to sleep with one ear always alert, with shallow breaths so she could wake quickly, with muscles perpetually ready to tense if a door opened too fast or a familiar low voice sounded behind her. Every small noise in the house made her flinch. Wind brushes against the windows, the crackle of firewood in the fireplace, the faint vibration of heating pipes adjusting. All of it was harmless, but her body could no longer tell the difference. It only knew how to react, like an animal that had been kept in a cage for too long. Noah slept fitfully. He shifted now and then, making soft, indistinct sounds in his throat. Each time Elena bent down at once, pressing her cheek to his forehead, whispering meaningless words, just to keep herself anchored in the present. His warmth was the only anchor stopping her from drifting back into the months she'd tried so hard to forget. When footsteps sounded in the hallway, Elena went rigid. They weren't heavy footsteps, not hurried, not abrupt, but they were enough to make her heart pound harder. She curled inward instinctively before reason could intervene. Noah was pulled tighter into her arms, the embrace nearly painful. The reflex was burned into her bones. Protect the child first. Think later. As Sebastian appeared at the edge of the living room, not stepping inside, he stopped as if deliberately keeping his distance, so his presence wouldn't spill into the small space she'd built around the sofa. He wore a dark sweater, a warm glass of water in his hand. Firelight from the hearth softened the lines of his face, easing features that were usually sharp. "How is the little guy?" he asked, his voice low and calm. Elena looked up and gave a very slight nod. She didn't answer right away, as if afraid her voice would betray the tension in her chest. Sebastian didn't press. He set the glass on the low table nearby and remained still. He didn't approach, didn't bend to look at her child, didn't do anything that could be read as control. Elena noticed, and because of that, she didn't know what to do. Kind people were always the hardest to deal with. He appeared several times throughout the night, always the same way, coming close but not intruding, doing what was necessary, then withdrawing, adding another blanket, adjusting the temperature, checking Noah's breathing from a distance. Each time Elena avoided his gaze, turning away too quickly, as if she'd been caught exposing something she shouldn't. It wasn't because she was afraid of him. She understood the difference well. True fear was loud, chaotic, demanding resistance. What she felt with Sebastian was different. It was quiet, heavy, a fear of being asked questions. Being asked meant having to answer, and answering meant opening things she had sealed shut in order to survive. Near dawn, when the storm outside eased, Elena finally stood and went to the bedroom Sebastian had shown her earlier. The room was spacious, the bed large and covered in pristine white sheets, so clean she hesitated to set Noah down right away. She checked the windows, locked the bathroom door, lightly wedged a chair against the main door out of habit. An unnecessary habit in this house, but her body didn't know that. She lay down very late, but didn't truly sleep. She only closed her eyes and listened, counted her child's breaths, counted the minutes passing in silence. Morning arrived without sound. Pale gray light slipped through the curtains, spreading across the floor in muted patches. When Elena opened her eyes, her heart raced again, the familiar flash of panic when she couldn't remember where she was. Then she felt warmth beside her, Noah's steady breathing, and everything slowly fell back into place. She sat up, gathered him into her arms by instinct, and stepped into the hallway. The house in the morning held the same quiet as the night before. except now the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Sebastian stood in the kitchen, his back to her. He paused when he heard her footsteps, tilting his head toward her, but not speaking right away. Elena stopped short. She leaned against the cold wall, feeling as though she'd stepped into a different room, one where the light was clearer and every unasked question was beginning to take shape. "Did you sleep at all?" Sebastian asked. Elena nodded, then shook her head. The contradiction made her realize how exhausted she was, too tired to maintain a calm facade. She looked down at Noah, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the fabric of his little shirt. Sebastian set his coffee cup down and turned to face her. The distance between them was far enough to feel non-threatening, yet close enough for Elena to sense that the next question, if it came, wouldn't be about the weather. She took a deep breath. "If you knew who I really am," Elena said, her voice soft but steady, "you wouldn't help me." Sebastian didn't react immediately. He didn't ask, "Who are you?" He didn't frown. He didn't show curiosity. He simply stood there, his gaze darkening for a brief moment. That unsettled Elena more than any sharp reaction could have. She had braced herself for change, for his expression to cool, for his kindness to be withdrawn. But nothing happened. "I didn't help because of who you are," Sebastian said after a pause. "I helped because you needed it last night." Elena tightened her hold on her son. The answer was too simple, too unsafe. Life had taught her that no one gave without expecting something in return. And those who said, "just because you needed it," were often the most dangerous. "You don't understand." She shook her head, her voice catching. "Things aren't that simple." "Maybe not," he said. "But this morning, the only thing I need to know is whether either of you is cold." He walked to a cabinet, took out a bottle that had already been warmed, and placed it on the table. The gesture, small, practical, left Elena with no words to argue. All the speeches she had prepared unraveled in the face of that simple action. She stood there, feeling as though she was bracing against something she couldn't name. Not a threat, but an unfamiliar safety. Elena turned away before her eyes became too wet. Deep down, she knew that if she stayed in this place much longer, if she heard a few more words without conditions attached, the wall she'd built to survive would begin to crack. And she wasn't sure she was ready to face what might pour out. Safety to Elena was not a place to rest. It was something she had to learn again, from the beginning. The morning passed in a cautious silence. Elena warmed milk for Noah, her hands trembling, out of exhaustion, out of tension, out of unfamiliarity with a kitchen that held no shouting, no shadow standing behind her, monitoring her every move. Sebastian had left her alone and gone to his study, but Elena knew he was still watchful enough to make sure she didn't stumble or collapse. When Noah fell back asleep in her arms, the house felt too spacious, too calm, making each breath Elena took feel heavier. Peace was always the most dangerous moment. It forced the truth inside her to stop hiding. She found Sebastian in the living room, standing before the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cup of coffee gone cold. He stared out through the glass doors, where snow continued to fall outside, lighter than the night before, but still blanketing the sky in white. Elena stood at the doorway, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor, Noah resting against her shoulder. It took her a long time before she finally spoke. "My name is Elena," she said softly, as though introducing herself to a world she had disappeared from for far too long. "And this is Noah." Sebastian turned. His gaze held no scrutiny, no chill. It simply waited, ready for her to continue if she chose to. Elena swallowed an old ache. The next words were harder to push out than she expected. "I didn't choose this life," she began. "My father signed a marriage agreement with the Moore family when I was 20. A wealthy fiancé, young, influential, a dream marriage, or so his friends said." She let out a brittle sound, not quite a laugh, more like a memory worn thin. "They told me I was lucky," Elena continued, "that I'd live the life everyone wanted, that I'd never have to worry about anything again." Sebastian didn't sit, didn't interrupt. He stood still, the distance between them just wide enough so she wouldn't feel cornered. yet close enough so she knew he was listening. But behind closed doors, she held Noah tighter, her voice rasping. Nothing was as they said. She drew a deep breath, as if pulling each fragment of memory out of a dark pit. I wasn't allowed to have friends. I couldn't call my mother unless someone stood beside me. My phone was monitored. The bank account in my name was never truly mine. I wasn't allowed to work. I couldn't go out alone. I couldn't buy anything he hadn't approved. Sebastian's expression remained the same. Quiet, steady, without judgment. Elena stared down at her trembling feet. He wanted me beautiful, perfect, a decorative piece for the Moore family. But, her voice cracked, I wasn't allowed to have a voice. The wind pushed snow against the glass, the soft thuds echoing from the past. Elena paused as if the snow itself reminded her of how long she had been silent. I ran away before Noah turned 1, she said. I knew I wouldn't survive if I stayed any longer. Sebastian set his coffee cup down. Elena heard the soft sound of porcelain against wood, and strangely, it didn't frighten her. It was just an ordinary sound made by an ordinary man, a sound she had forgotten existed. I know what you're thinking, Elena said quickly, her eyes reddening, as though trying to defend herself from a judgment that hadn't come. That I should have gone to the police, that I should have asked for help. But you don't understand. No one believed me. He never hit me, not once. Her voice broke despite her effort to stay composed. And because he never hit me, no one believed I was being abused. What mattered was that he had a voice. He said no one would ever believe mine. The room fell utterly still. The flames in the fireplace bent and flared, as if listening. Elena pressed her lips to Noah's forehead, as though drawing strength from his warmth. I was just a difficult wife, a new mother with changing hormones, a woman who was too sensitive. That's what they said. Her breathing hitched, shoulders trembling. Until I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted my child to breathe. Sebastian finally stepped closer, but very slowly, as though each step was measured to avoid triggering her fear. He stopped a few paces away, near enough to be a presence, not an obstacle. Elena, he said, his voice low and solid, like the stone beneath her feet. No one has the right to say you're not in pain just because they can't see the wounds. Elena clutched Noah tighter, her breath catching. She didn't trust him, not yet, but for the first time she didn't step back. For the first time, she let words touch her without raising a barrier. For the first time, she was not running. She simply stood there, exhausted, wounded, but real. And Sebastian Hale saw all of it. Elena had been in that villa for exactly 1 week. Today was Christmas. The thought came without fear. It was simply a quiet fact, like the snow continuing to fall, Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms. In this room, spacious, warm, silent, not disappearing every time she blinked. Elena held her son and sat still for a long while. For many years, Christmas had become a day she had to perform. A pretty dress, a carefully measured smile, perfect photos posted right on time. She had thought she'd forgotten what a real Christmas felt like. But this morning, in that silence, she suddenly wanted to do something. Not out of obligation, not out of fear of being judged, simply because today was Christmas, and she was still here. So Elena went down to the kitchen while Noah played on his own on the rug by the window, where the light was softest. Sebastian's kitchen was large and immaculate, everything arranged precisely in its place, like a space designed to never be invaded by ordinary life. Elena stood in the middle of it, her hand resting on the cold stone countertop, took a deep breath, and began. She made a dinner in the traditional American Christmas style, the kind of meal people cook when they want to call something a family, even if that family is very small. She didn't need perfect details or flawless execution. She cooked from hazy memories, from old Christmases before everything became distorted, from the instinct of a woman who wanted to create something warm in a kitchen that, for the first time, didn't make her tense. Elena moved quietly, almost without sound. Old habits remained, wiping the counter as soon as she finished each step, putting utensils back exactly where they belonged. But this time, there were no eyes behind her back, no reminders, no invisible inspections. She slowed down. She allowed herself to pause and watch Noah smiling at the snowy reflections outside the window. She allowed herself to make small mistakes, to taste, to adjust. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to. When the scent of food filled the kitchen, Elena realized how long it had been since she'd cooked simply to feel herself living inside the day. This Christmas didn't need to prove anything. It didn't need extravagant decorations. It just needed to exist. She found a small box of lights in a cabinet and hung them around the tree in the corner of the living room. The tree had stood there all week, tall, beautiful, but empty. Elena wrapped the lights around it, some places too tight, others a little loose. When she turned them on, warm yellow dots spread across the room, reflected off the windows and the floor, making the space feel as if it had released a quiet breath. Noah looked at the lights and burst into laughter. Not the small laugh of a baby being coaxed, but a full, open sound, ringing out naturally, as if he had never known fear. His little body wiggled with excitement, his hands clapping without purpose. Elena froze, her heart tightening with a feeling at once painful and warm. She had seen Noah smile before, but never like this. Unguarded, unlost, completely safe within the moment. Sebastian stood at the end of the hallway, unclear how long he'd been there. He wasn't intentionally watching. He'd simply passed by, then stopped. The scene before him wasn't dramatic. Elena near the kitchen, small lights resting on her shoulders, Noah on the floor, laughing in the wide room, the tree finally looking like something more than decoration. Yet that simplicity kept him from taking another step. It had been a long time since a meal was prepared because today was special, since a child's laughter had filled the house, since Christmas had existed in its true sense. Sebastian had believed he was used to that holidays were just empty spaces covered by good wine and a packed schedule. But when Elena set the table, simple, unadorned, and called Noah over in a gentle voice, he felt something unfamiliar seeping into the villa. Not excitement, but the warmth of a home. They ate dinner together, no ceremony, no long toasts, just hot food, tiny lights, snow falling outside, and a child laughing enough to catch every adult off guard. Sebastian sat there, listening to sounds that had once been absent from his life, and realized that this villa, for the first time, was more than just a place to return to. When night fully settled, Elena held Noah in front of the tree, and the lights reflected in his eyes. Sebastian stood a short distance away, not intruding on the moment between mother and child, but no longer standing outside it either. Christmas passed without promises. But in that winter villa, amid white snow and golden light, something quietly happened. A day lived as it was meant to be, not for the past, not out of fear, simply because it was Christmas and they chose to stay. A few days after Christmas Eve, the snow had stopped falling heavily, but the cold still lingered in the air, like a reminder that winter had no intention of letting go. The mansion had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, except now the silence carried traces of life. A forgotten milk cup on the windowsill, a few toys scattered across the carpet, and the faint scent of baby soap drifting somewhere along the hallway. Sebastian was in his study when the phone vibrated. The sound wasn't hurried nor loud, yet it cut sharply, one of those ringtones reserved only for calls that were never trivial. He glanced at the screen, and his brow tightened. The name that appeared made him pause for exactly one beat, as if instinct recognized the danger before logic did. "Victor Moore," Sebastian answered. "Sebastian," the man on the other end said, his voice deep and smooth, familiar enough to need no introduction. "I finally reached you." No greeting, no pleasantries, just the tone of someone accustomed to being heard. "What do you want?" Sebastian asked evenly, revealing nothing. Victor chuckled softly. It wasn't amusement, just a practiced sound, more habit than emotion. "My wife is at your house," Victor said, "and you seem to believe you can keep her there." The study's atmosphere froze. Sebastian didn't move, his hands still resting on the wooden desk, eyes fixed on the snow-coated pines outside the window. For a moment, every sound in the mansion, the crackle of the fireplace, distant soft footsteps, the steady breath of the quiet room seemed to recede. "Elena is my wife," Victor continued, his tone crisp, every syllable delivered like a legal statement rather than a fact of life. You are holding my wife and child unlawfully. Sebastian didn't respond right away. He'd been in countless calls like this. Calls where power didn't need to raise its voice, where the man on the other end believed that saying his own name was enough to restore order. But this time, that name wasn't followed by numbers or contracts. It carried the image of a woman standing in his kitchen, hands trembling as she held her child. Victor didn't seem to require an answer. She's just upset, Victor said lightly, almost affably. Elena tends to overreact, especially after childbirth. Hormones, you understand. Women sometimes convince themselves they're victims. Sebastian clenched his jaw. A tiny movement, but proof that a very specific kind of anger, controlled, cold, calculated, was rising. Don't let her manipulate you, Victor continued, his soft laugh sliding through each word. She's quite skilled at playing the victim. Sensitive, fragile, the kind of weakness that makes people think they're doing the right thing. Sebastian lowered his gaze. From where he stood, he could see the faint scratch across his knuckle, a mark from the night he carried Noah through the blizzard, when the keyring scraped his skin. A tiny reminder, enough to anchor him in the present, while Victor's words hollowed the air. They're safe, Sebastian finally said, voice low, not clipped, but unshakably firm. That's all I need to know. Victor paused, then laughed louder this time, genuine enjoyment creeping into the sound. Sebastian, you've always been more pragmatic than that, he said. We have a major deal to finalize. Billions. The entire board is waiting. I doubt you want a small family misunderstanding to complicate things. Misunderstanding. Sebastian closed his eyes for a measured second. Long enough to inhale, exhale. He thought of Elena, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, how her gaze dropped when asked about her past, how she said no one believed her because she bore no bruises. All of it, to Victor, reduced to a word lighter than air. Bring her back, Victor said, lowering his voice, coating it with that artificial sweetness of someone convinced he's granting a favor. Let me handle it. She belongs where she is supposed to be. And you have an empire to protect. Sebastian opened his eyes. Snow still fell outside, slow, silent, settling evenly over everything without discrimination. He noticed the bitter symmetry. In weather like this, a stranger once saved him and his mother from a night that could have erased them. And now another man, with polite diction and power tucked into every syllable, demanded that Sebastian return what the storm had once delivered to his own doorstep. We'll discuss the deal later, Sebastian said, voice calm in a way that carried danger. As for Elena and the child, they're my family, Victor snapped, and you have no right to interfere. If you insist on this nonsense, I'll report you for unlawfully detaining my wife and son. I know you won't, Sebastian replied. If you were going to call the police, you would have done so before calling me. The person who should speak to the police is Elena. The call ended with a sharp final click. Sebastian lowered the phone onto the desk, slowly. The study settled back into silence, but it was no longer the same. The air had thickened, carrying the scent of a storm gathering, not outside, but within these very walls. From the hallway came the faint sound of Noah's laughter, a small, fragile noise, yet it pierced through calculations and consequences like a blade of clarity. Sebastian turned toward the sound, his hand resting on the cool wood of the desk, and understood that from this moment on, everything had shifted. This was no longer a kindness offered on a snowy night, no longer a temporary shelter. The phone call had turned it into a boundary, and on the other side of that boundary was a choice no one could run from. Elena stood at the end of the hallway, pressed into a corner where the light didn't reach. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Victor's voice carried out of the study, steady, cold, so familiar that a single sentence was enough to make the strength drain from her legs. Elena closed her eyes. She had known he would come looking for her. She had known this peace was only a brief pause between storms, but hearing him say those words, in the voice she had lived with for years, made her ears ring, made the spacious villa suddenly feel as tight as a sealed box. Elena collapsed, not from Noah's weight, but from something heavier, the terror of being dragged back to the place she had fled with every remaining fragment of her soul. Her knees hit the cold wooden floor. Noah's face pressed into her neck, his breathing even, unaware of everything. She tried not to make a sound, but her breath shattered anyway. Hot tears spilled over, despite her clenched jaw, despite her effort to force them back. When Sebastian appeared at the end of the hallway, Elena flinched as if someone had touched an unhealed wound. He didn't come closer. He stood a few steps away and saw everything. A woman clutching a child in desperation, shoulders trembling violently, eyes filled with the fear of someone who knows her choices are slipping away. "You heard him?" Elena said, her voice breaking, each word tearing at her throat. "Please, don't hand me back. I'll do anything. I'm not who he says I am. Please, don't give us to us. We'll leave." She bowed her head lower, as if pleading with fate itself. Yet her arms never loosened around Noah. Sebastian took one step forward, but didn't touch her. "Elena," he said softly. She looked up. Her eyes were red and soaked. That look wasn't the gaze of someone begging. It was the look of someone who had been cornered too many times, until desperation had turned into a silent plea. "You don't know him," she said, her voice trembling. "He'll crush anyone who stands between him and me. One phone call and you'd lose everything. You don't owe me anything. I understand." Elena adjusted Noah in her arms and slowly stood. Her legs were still shaking, but there was resolve in every movement, the resolve of a mother prepared to sacrifice herself to protect her child. "I'll leave tonight." Sebastian looked toward the glass doors. Snow was falling hard again, thick sheets slamming against the windows like winter's furious hands. "Elena," he said quietly, "there's still a blizzard outside." She nodded without hesitation. "I know." That answer tightened Sebastian's chest. He had seen this before. He had stood in another hallway once, when his mother held him and spoke in that same tone. The voice of someone who knows that survival isn't always a choice. She looked at him now, not avoiding his gaze for the first time. "I don't want you to get into trouble. If I stay, he'll destroy you. I can't let that happen." Sebastian remained still. In Elena's eyes, he saw himself from years ago, a child who never dared grab onto anyone's hand, knowing that kind hand sometimes paid too high a price. Someone who understood that sometimes running away isn't cowardice. It's the last surviving instinct. Elena placed one hand on the door handle, the other holding Noah tight to her chest, ready to step into the white, blinding night. Sebastian spoke, not loudly but enough to stop her. "I believe you." Elena froze. Those words, simple, without promise, without conditions, struck the most fragile place inside her, the place she had never dared believe still existed. "Not stay, not I'll protect you. I believe you." A man like Sebastian Hale, rational, controlled, not easily persuaded, saying that to her, to Elena, to the woman Victor's world labeled a liar. She turned back to him, lips parted, unable to speak. Sebastian stepped closer, close enough for her to see the seriousness in his eyes, but still far enough not to frighten her. "If you say you need to leave," he said slowly, "I won't stop you. But if you're leaving because you think you're a burden, then you're wrong." Elena clutched Noah to her chest, her entire body shaking, for the first time not from fear, but from being believed. Outside, the blizzard still howled, but in that hallway, for the first time in a long while, someone didn't ask her to prove she was worthy of help. He simply believed her. The contract lay at the center of the conference table like a living entity, thick, heavy, silent, but brimming with power. Pristine white pages, cold printed text, and numbers arranged so neatly they looked incapable of ever having harmed anyone. Victor Moore sat across from Sebastian with the ease of a man convinced that everything would soon be restored to its rightful order. "We don't need to turn this into drama," Victor said, his tone even and polite, as if discussing the weather. "This is a perfect agreement, mutual benefit. Your board thinks so too." Sebastian didn't look at the contract right away. His gaze settled instead on the glass wall behind Victor, where the sky hung gray and waited, snow drifting down as though winter itself was eavesdropping on this conversation. "You're keeping my wife," Victor continued, leaning forward, fingers interlocked. "I don't want this to become messy. Elena will come home. And you sign here. Your company thrives, your employees stay protected. Everything goes back to the way it was. Sebastian finally lowered his eyes to the contract. A multi-billion-dollar deal, market expansion, supply chain stability, thousands of jobs secured, everything he had worked for, piece by piece, through the sacrifices of a lifetime. And if I don't? Sebastian asked. Victor shrugged lightly. Then I pull my capital. Others will follow. Credit lines collapse. Shareholders panic. He paused, smiling. You know how it works. There's no place for personal matters in business. No personal matters. Sebastian remembered Elena's eyes when she said no one believed her, because there were no bruises. Remembered Noah laughing in front of the Christmas tree. Remembered the words, I believe you, leaving his mouth like an unspoken oath. Victor slid the contract toward him and tapped the last page. Sign, he said. Settle this family issue. Then we go back to being partners. The meeting ended quickly, Victor's signature style. No drawn-out debate, no time for emotions to take shape. When the conference room door shut, Sebastian remained alone with the contract in a silence thick enough to breathe. He didn't sign, but he didn't tear it apart either. He stood there for a long time until afternoon light sank into a deeper gray, then returned to the mansion. Elena learned everything that night. Not from Victor, not from the news, but from Sebastian's eyes. The eyes of a man who had brought home another kind of storm, quieter and far more dangerous. Elena, he said when he saw her standing in the living room, Noah asleep in her arms. We need to talk. She nodded. Her body went rigid instantly, as if she already knew the shape of the words before he spoke them. Sebastian didn't soften anything. He told her about the meeting, the contract, the choices laid before him. Every detail, unembellished, unshielded from consequence. When he finished, the room went so still Elena could hear her heartbeat pulsing in her ears. She looked down at Noah. The boy slept peacefully, unaware that his life had been placed on a negotiation table between powerful men. You'll lose everything, Elena whispered, as though saying it any louder might collapse the world. Your company, the people who work for you, everything you built. Sebastian didn't deny it. And he'll gain everything, she went on, her voice shaking. He'll use me to prove he's right, that I'm just a tantrum he can drag home and tame. She turned away, taking a few steps, steadying herself. When she faced him again, her eyes were dry, far more dangerous than tears. I don't want you to pay for me, Elena said. I've spent my whole life being a bargaining chip. I can't let saving me destroy someone else. Sebastian stood still. He knew this logic too well. It was the reasoning of someone who had been forced, time and time again, to choose the option that hurt others the least, even when it shredded her own soul. Elena inhaled, summoning a decision she had rehearsed her entire life. I'll go back, she said. You shouldn't lose everything because of me. The sentence fell between them, heavier than any clause in Victor's contract. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't weakness. It was the raw sacrifice of a mother, of a woman who had long learned how to turn herself into the price others paid. Sebastian didn't reply. His silence wasn't hesitation. It was the kind of silence that forms when speaking would make something irreversible. He stared at Elena, at the way she held Noah tighter, bracing for departure. He saw in her what no deal on earth could purchase, a truth that could not be negotiated. He turned away, hand resting on the cold wooden chair. At that moment, his silence hurt more than any hostile negotiation, because he understood that this battle was no longer about personal choices. It was the boundary between keeping everything he owned and keeping who he was. Outside, snow began to fall again, and somewhere within the cold numbers of a billion-dollar contract, a decision that couldn't be measured in profit was beginning to take shape. Sebastian sat down on the edge of the wooden table, his hands clasped together. Elena stood a few steps away, holding Noah tight to her chest, as if even the silence itself could become dangerous. But when he looked up, his eyes weren't cold as usual. They were heavy, deep, as if he were opening a door he had kept locked very carefully. You think I don't understand, Sebastian said quietly. But I do. More than you realize. Elena didn't answer. She only looked at him and waited. Sebastian drew a deep breath, as if pulling the memory up from the darkest place inside him. My mother was truly abused. Elena tightened her hold on Noah. The words were too direct, too real. The air in the room shifted. My father was a respected man on the outside, Sebastian continued, his voice steady but slowing with each sentence. But he drank, and when he was drunk, he beat my mother, not once, not by accident. They were deliberate, brutal beatings. Elena closed her eyes, her chest tightening. Every time he slammed the door, her whole body would flinch, Sebastian said, fragments of childhood flashing through his eyes. Some nights I woke up to the sound of my mother crying silently, trying to keep him from hearing. She held me in the dark, shielding me from blows she couldn't dodge herself. Elena raised a hand to her mouth. She didn't speak, but her eyes blurred with tears. Then one night, Sebastian went on, he drank more than he ever had before. So much that when the rage came, he could no longer tell the difference between furniture and his wife and child. His voice dropped lower. He threw a bottle. It shattered right next to my head. Half of my mother's face was covered in blood, and he still didn't stop. The room fell into a frozen silence. She picked me up and ran. No coat, no money, no phone. Sebastian looked straight at Elena. Just ran to survive. Elena trembled because she understood what it meant to run on pure instinct. That night there was a blizzard, Sebastian said, his gaze drifting toward the window, as if the snow outside still belonged to that night long ago. The wind was so strong, she nearly fell several times. I was almost unconscious from the cold and fear. She held me tight and sat at an old bus stop, just like the one you were at that night. Elena pressed a hand to her chest as if her heart ached for that woman. She was shaking so badly she couldn't stand anymore. I thought, that was when we were going to die. A long, quiet breath followed, heavy with the past. Then a car stopped. Elena opened her eyes. She knew that sentence. She had heard this man say it once before, when he bent down and lifted Noah in the middle of the blizzard. The man got out of the car, Sebastian continued. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what my mother had done wrong. He didn't ask whether she had somewhere to go. He just looked at the two of us and said exactly 3 words. Sebastian lifted his head and repeated them in the same low voice that had saved Elena and Noah that night. Come with me. Elena gasped. Tears spilled down her cheeks without control. If that man hadn't shown kindness that night, Sebastian said, meeting her gaze without looking away, I wouldn't exist. My mother wouldn't exist. And everything I have now, my company, this life would mean nothing. This wasn't just a story, it was the reason. The reason he had stopped his car on a snowy night. The reason he wouldn't let her walk away alone in despair. The reason he could never hand her back to the man who made her tremble the way his mother once had. Elena hugged Noah closer, as if for the first time in many years. She had found someone who truly understood. Sebastian looked at her, and for the first time he spoke without hiding the truth. I didn't save you out of pity. I stepped in, because I know. Because I was once the child in the arms of a woman like you. And because I owe the man from that night one stopped car. Elena collapsed onto the chair, her tears falling silently. Sebastian didn't touch her. He simply stood there close enough that she no longer felt alone, far enough for her to find her breath on her own. Outside, the snow fell quietly, as if returning an old memory, but this time, to heal it. The conference room was sealed shut, white lights beaming straight down onto the long table, sharp enough to leave no shadow behind. Beyond the thick glass, the winter-stricken city blurred beneath layers of snow, skyscrapers looking as though they'd been severed from the ground. A perfect setting for cold decisions, where emotions had no seat. Victor Moore was the first to speak. For personal reasons, he said, his voice courteous, even carrying a rehearsed note of regret, I've decided to withdraw my investment. Sebastian and I are no longer compatible as partners. Some board members looked up. Others flipped through their documents as if expecting to find a footnote explaining the personal feud. No one asked questions. No one dared to explore the gray zone between two powerful men. Sebastian remained still. His expression was unchanged. Victor placed both hands on the table, fingers interlacing as he leaned slightly forward. A minimal gesture, yet enough to claim the room without raising his voice. I'm not interested in making this dramatic, he continued. We all have reputations to protect. I simply think, if Sebastian is willing to offer an apology, then perhaps we can move past this and proceed. The air tightened. An apology. A harmless word, civilized even. But Sebastian knew exactly what it meant, returning Elena and her child to Victor. The apology Victor asked for was a leash, one he expected Sebastian to fasten himself. Sebastian looked at Victor, his expression calm. No hostility, no anger. Just clarity, the kind found in someone who had finished reading the rules of a game he refused to play. A board member spoke, voice low but urgent. Sebastian, if this is personal, a simple apology could settle everything. This deal is vital to the company's future. Another nodded. Exactly. We can't allow emotions to disrupt long-term strategy. No one is asking you to compromise your business principles. No one mentioned the real price of that apology, but Sebastian knew, and Victor knew he knew. Victor smiled, a thin curve sharp as a blade. Sebastian placed both palms on the table and rose. The chair slid back with a crisp sound, an audible period at the end of all ambiguity. I understand your proposal, Sebastian said evenly, and I understand the board's concern. Several shoulders relaxed, assuming he was about to take the familiar route. Compromise. Sebastian turned fully toward Victor. But I will not apologize. The room froze. Victor narrowed his eyes. One board member shot up from his seat. Sebastian, reconsider. This is not the time for stubbornness. I have reconsidered, he replied, very carefully. A low murmur spread. Stock prices, capital withdrawal, domino effect. Words collided like falling tiles, thick enough to form tension in the air. Sebastian faced the board, meeting every gaze without flinching. If this deal depends on an apology I cannot give, then the deal ends here, he said. I accept Victor's withdrawal. Someone gasped. Someone slammed a hand on the table. Do you understand what that means? You're putting the company at risk. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He let their panic wash over him, then spoke slowly, each word firm. I will find another way. 3 words, no theatrics, no empty promises, just a fact. We will restructure, he continued. Seek new investors. Adjust our trajectory. It will be difficult. It will take time. But we will not move forward by bowing to conditions that do not belong on this table. Silence dropped heavy, profound. Victor stared at him, the composure cracking just enough to reveal irritation beneath the polished veneer. You're destroying everything, Victor said. Sebastian held his gaze. No, he replied. I'm choosing not to destroy myself. No applause, no praise, only silence, the kind that acknowledged an irreversible line had been drawn. Sebastian turned and walked out. The glass door shut behind him, muffling the voices, sealing away the chaos. Outside, snow continued to fall white, cold, indifferent, but the path ahead, though brutal, had never been clearer. He had not apologized. He had not yielded. And whatever price that was demanded, he was prepared to pay it. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet, relentless, like winter with no promise of thaw. After that meeting, Sebastian's company entered the most difficult period since its founding. Victor withdrew his investment publicly. No theatrics, no attacks, just a brief announcement with enough force to shake everything. And like pieces already placed on the board, several other investors, those directly or indirectly influenced by Victor, began to waver as well. Calls became more frequent. Emails arrived with a familiar tone of reassessing risk. Meetings stretched late into the night, where numbers no longer lined up neatly but piled on top of one another, colliding, threatening collapse. Sebastian carried it all in silence. He came home each evening wearing a calm that felt almost deliberate. He took off his coat, hung it neatly as always, and smiled when Noah crawled toward him with arms lifted high. He bent down, letting the child climb onto his chest, laughing when Noah tugged at his tie with tiny fists. With Elena, he spoke of small things: snow falling again, the road up the hill getting slicker, Noah eating better than the day before. But once the door to his study closed, that man disappeared. Sebastian sat alone before the screen, blue light reflecting off a face etched with fatigue, reports stacked high, forecast lines are glowing red, Temporary fixes were replacing a pillar that had just collapsed. He didn't regret his choices, but the weight was real, and it pressed down on him each night. When the house grew so quiet, he could hear the snow hitting the windows. Elena saw everything. She saw how he moved more slowly each night, how his smile appeared quickly and vanished just as fast. She saw his eyes darken in moments he thought went unnoticed, when he believed no one was watching. The pain inside her didn't explode. It was quieter than that. It was the pain of being loved the right way, then realizing that her very presence was making someone else pay a price. One night, after Noah fell asleep, Elena stood by the window for a long time. When she finally turned back, her voice was frighteningly calm. "I'm going to visit my aunt for a while," she said. Sebastian looked up. In a brief, silent beat, he understood. Before she explained anything, his chest tightened, but he didn't stop her. He didn't ask questions. He only nodded, very slowly. "If you need anything," he said, "just call." Elena stepped forward and bent down to hold Noah tightly. For Sebastian, the minutes with mother and child were the only moments in his day that carried no weight. He wanted to hold on to them, but he also understood respecting her choice was the only way not to become another man altogether. Elena left quietly. She didn't go to visit her aunt. She returned to the place she had once fled. The old house was the same, large, cold, suffocatingly silent. Victor was pleased to see her. He didn't hide it. His smile carried the shape of victory, the smile of someone who believed everything had finally returned to where it belonged. "You see," he said, his voice falsely gentle, "you can't survive without me." Elena said nothing. She let him believe it. In the days that followed, the abuse grew worse. No more pretense. No more keeping up appearances at home. Victor controlled every step she took, every phone call, every breath. At the same time, he fed stories to the press. Vague articles about an unstable wife, about the reunion of a prestigious family, about misunderstandings now resolved. Each line was a small knife. Elena mesmerized everyone. She began collecting evidence. Old emails she had never deleted. Audio recordings quietly activated inside her pocket when he thought she was obediently silent. Financial documents Victor assumed she would never understand. Every night when he was drunk, Elena sat alone in the bathroom, the door locked, shaking as she backed up the data to a safe place. Sebastian read the news with his chest twisting in on itself. He saw Elena's image on the headlines, framed by lies he recognized instantly. He saw Victor standing beside her, triumphant. His worry blurred the numbers before his eyes, but he didn't act recklessly. He understood that if she had gone back, it wasn't a surrender. It was preparation. 2 months passed, stretched to the limit of endurance. Then one morning, Victor Moore's world collapsed. Police arrived at his company headquarters. Charges were announced: abuse, coercive control, and financial manipulation. Illegal deals, once carefully buried, were exposed before the media. The evidence Elena had quietly gathered surfaced. Complete, precise, impossible to deny. Victor was handcuffed in front of the cameras, his face twisted with rage and terror, not because he was losing his freedom, but because he was losing control. What he had believed permanent finally slipped from his grasp. Elena stood at a distance, unseen by the press. She didn't need to appear. She had fought in her own way, and for the first time in a very long time, she no longer had to run. Spring arrived gently, as though careful not to startle a world that had already endured too much. The snow melted slowly along the hillside, revealing the first patches of young grass. The sunlight wasn't harsh anymore, just warm enough for people to leave their windows open a little longer each morning and believe that winter had, finally, stayed behind. Sebastian Hale stood before the large office window, watching the pine forest shift colors day by day. His company was still standing. Not without scars. Weeks of uncertainty had left visible traces. But once Victor Moore was arrested, the invisible weight pressing on the market lifted. Investors who had hesitated stopped pulling out. Some returned. Others reached out first, as if it was only now safe to admit they'd been waiting for this moment all along. Sebastian had kept the company, but he understood one thing clearly. It was no longer the same. It was no longer an empire built from cold precision and absolute control. It had become a place where he chose transparency, caution, and, for the first time, people standing equal to numbers. Meetings were less sharp-edged. Decisions weren't made solely on short-term profit. He didn't call it a sacrifice. It was simply a different way of living, one he learned when he thought he was on the verge of losing everything. Elena rebuilt her life from the smallest things. She didn't rush. She had nothing to prove. She took Noah on morning walks and sat in a small cafe where no one knew that her name had once appeared in newspapers. She learned to open her phone without flinching, learned to sleep through the night, learned to say no without her hands shaking. One early spring day, Elena went to see Victor, not for forgiveness, not for answers, just because she was finally strong enough to face her past without letting it define her anymore. Victor looked smaller in the visitation room. No tailored suit, no gaze of a man who controlled the world. When he saw her, he stayed silent for a long time, and then finally he lowered his head. "I'm sorry," he said, voice hoarse. "I destroyed a person and believed it was my right." Elena didn't respond immediately. She looked at him, not with anger, not with pity. "I didn't come to hear an apology," she said. "I came so I could leave without taking you with me." Victor nodded painfully. "I hope you're happy." Elena stood, walked out of that room, and felt lighter than she had in years, not because of the apology, but because she no longer needed it to move on. Noah grew up safe. He ran freely across the grass, laughing loudly, never afraid of sudden noises or looming shadows. To Noah, the world was a place safe enough to explore. That was what Elena and Sebastian protected together, not through control, but through presence. One afternoon in the winter mansion that no longer felt remote, Sebastian stood by the window, sunlight resting on his shoulders. Elena approached and placed her hand over his, a familiar gesture that required no explanation. Sebastian turned to her, held her gaze for a long moment, then said quietly, "This time, let's not leave." Noah sprinted toward them, hugging Sebastian's legs so tightly his whole body shook with laughter. Elena laughed too. The sound filled the room that had once been silent, now overflowing with life. A year later, they were married. No spectacle, no grandeur, just the people who truly mattered, witnessing a promise born not from rescue, but from choosing to stay. Noah stood in the aisle, holding both their hands so serious it made everyone smile. Life opened itself once more. Noah gained a sister, a baby born in laughter, not fear. In that home, there were no slammed doors, no whispered conversations born of dread. Sebastian and Elena founded a support fund for abused women. Elena ran it, listening to every story with the patience of someone who had once lived those words, helping each woman without taking away her dignity. Not everyone could be saved the same way, but everyone could be believed. And that was what mattered most. Some storms never truly disappear. They simply teach people when to stop the car. And some lives that were once saved on a snowy night eventually become a shelter for someone else. Spring kept coming, and this time no one had to leave.